Penguin Random House Canada Audio presents Willful Blindness, Why We Ignore the Obvious at Our Peril, by Margaret Heffernan, read for you by the author.
Introduction.
"Go, go, go," said the bird. "Humankind cannot bear very much reality." T.S. Eliot, 4 quartets.
When the psychologist Philip Zimbardo was 5 years old, double pneumonia and whooping cough landed him in New York's Willard Parker Hospital. Kids, he said, were dying all over, and every morning you'd wake up and ask, "Where did Charlie go?" And the nurses would all say, "He went home." And we'd say, "Oh, that's great, he went home." But we all knew the kids who went home were dead. But here's the thing. The only way to be hopeful was to deny the reality. Zimbardo and his fellow patients were willfully blind, denying truths that were too painful, too frightening to confront. It's something we all do, even when we've grown up. The problem arises when we use the same mechanism to deny uncomfortable truths that cry out for acknowledgement, debate, action, and change. Many, perhaps even most, of the greatest crimes have been committed not in the dark, hidden where no one could see them, but in full view of so many people who simply chose not to look and not to question. Whether in the Catholic Church, the SEC, Nazi Germany, Madoff's funds, the embers of BP's refinery, the military in Iraq, or the dog-eat-dog world of subprime mortgage lenders, the central challenge posed by each case was not harm that was invisible, but harm that so many preferred to ignore. I first encountered the idea of willful blindness when I read the transcript of the trial of Jeffrey Skilling and Kenneth Lay, CEO and chairman of Enron. In his summary, Judge Simeon Lake gave this instruction to the jury. You may find that a defendant had knowledge of a fact if you find that the defendant deliberately closed his eyes to what would otherwise have been obvious to him. Knowledge can be inferred if the defendant deliberately blinded himself to the existence of a fact. Judge Lake was applying the legal concept of willful blindness. You are responsible if you could have known and should have known something that instead you strove not to see. In this case, Skilling and Lay could have known, and had the opportunity to know, just how rotten their company was. Their claim not to know was no excuse under the law. Since they could have known, they were responsible. Once the idea of willful blindness lodged in my mind, I started to see it everywhere. I'd seen it in marriages. Why had she never asked about all those business trips? I'd seen it in hospitals. Why had he skipped his checkup? Why had she started smoking? Boardrooms seemed to be full of it. Why did no one ever question that doomed deal? When I mentioned willful blindness to friends and colleagues from any walk of life, their eyes lit up. They knew exactly what I was talking about. Politicians recalled legislation they'd passed, knowing it would never work. Doctors described treatments their patients demanded and got, however unnecessary. Lawyers recounted their struggles to forget information their clients should not have shared with them. And product designers vented their rage about obvious trends that their companies had missed. When I mentioned willful blindness to accountants and auditors, they would talk in confidential tones about assimilating to their clients' sometimes elastic ethics, while chief executives described to me how hard it was, even in a small business, to know what was really going on. Almost everyone mentioned the Iraq War and global warming, big public blunders caused or exacerbated by a reluctance to confront uncomfortable facts. Willful blindness had started life as a legal concept in the 19th century. A judge in Regina v. Sleep ruled that an accused could not be convicted for possession of government property unless the jury found that he either knew the goods came from government stores or had willfully shut his eyes to the fact. Thereafter, English judicial authorities referred to the state of mind that accompanied one who willfully shut his eyes as connivance or constructive knowledge. Over time, lots of other phrases came into play: deliberate or willful ignorance, conscious avoidance, and deliberate indifference. What they all have in common is the idea that there is an opportunity for knowledge and a responsibility to be informed, but it's shirked. Nowadays, the law is most often applied in cases of money laundering or drug trafficking. If you've been paid a large amount of money to carry a suitcase, then you're being willfully blind if you don't check what's inside. What's most contentious about the legal concept of willful blindness is that it carries no implication that the avoidance of truth is conscious. The law doesn't care why you remain ignorant, only that you do. But I am interested in why we choose to keep ourselves in the dark. What are the forces at work that make us deny the big threats that stare us in the face? What stops us from seeing that burying knowledge makes it more powerful and makes us so much more vulnerable? Why, after every major failure or calamity, do voices always emerge saying they'd seen the danger, warned about the risk, but their warnings had gone unheeded? And why, as individuals, companies, and countries, do we so regularly look in the mirror and howl, how could we have been so blind? As I investigated the causes and patterns of willful blindness, from our daily lives to the boardrooms of global corporations, I could have confined myself to corporations alone. There's no shortage of material. But it struck me that one source of our blindness at work is the artificial divide between personal and working lives. Every workforce is a conglomeration of individuals whose behaviors and habits started well before they were hired. Individuals, singly and in groups, are both equally susceptible to willful blindness. What makes organizations different is the sheer scale of damage they can cause. Whether individual or collective, willful blindness doesn't have a single driver, but many. It's a human phenomenon to which we all succumb in matters little and large. We can't notice and know everything. The cognitive limits of our brain simply won't let us. That means we have to filter or edit what we take in. So what we choose to let through and to leave out is crucial. We mostly admit the information that makes us feel great about ourselves, while conveniently filtering what unsettles our fragile egos and most vital beliefs. It's a truism that love is blind. What's less obvious is just how much evidence it can ignore. Ideology powerfully masks what, to the uncaptivated mind, is obvious, dangerous, or absurd. And there's much about how and even where we live that leaves us in the dark. Fear of conflict, fear of change, keep us that way. An unconscious and much denied impulse to obey and conform shields us from confrontation. And crowds provide friendly alibis for our inertia. And money has the power to blind us even to our better selves. Of course, willful blindness isn't always disastrous. It oils the wheels of social intercourse when we don't see the spot on a silk tie, the girlfriend's acne, or a neighbor's squalor. Ignoring political differences may contribute to office calm. In times of national emergency, blindness can be positively helpful. During the London Blitz, morale was better sustained by dancing and party-going than by acknowledging a terrifying future. And just like the children in Willard Parker Hospital, we're able to maintain optimism and momentum because we don't daily confront our own mortality. Perhaps it's the sheer utility of willful blindness that sucks us into the habit in the first place. It seems innocuous and feels efficient. But the mechanisms that make us blind to the world also put us in peril. The children who grow up among abusive parents come to maturity feeling crazy, confused, and anxious because their reality has been consistently denied. Ideologues refusing to see data and events that challenge their theories doom themselves to irrelevance. Fraudsters only succeed when they depend on our desire to blind ourselves to the questions that would expose their schemes.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?